Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by Husky Harry, huggable homos who love film, to review something that we love to talk about. That, of course, being films, either current or classic. Lately, we've been a little heavy on the current films. We may find a hole to plug at some point with something classic, but we've got two films to discuss on this week's show. Not one, but two. We're going to be talking Paddington 2, the sequel to the very popular Paddington film that came out a couple years ago, as well as Call Me By Your Name, the new film that's raising a lot of controversy, but also getting a ton of potential Oscar buzz. We're going to find out tomorrow, right? Because Best Picture nominations come out. Excited to see that. I'm sure we'll have a lot to discuss on next week's show about that. But before we get into that awesomeness, let me introduce you to some even more awesomeness. My wonderful co-host, Jim Pugliafico, is back with us. Babe, welcome to the show.
Hi, guys. Thanks, Brad, and welcome to the podcast, everyone.
And Will Lindis is here with us as well from the road this time. It was Jim's turn a couple weeks ago. Will, now apparently you're up. Where are you, and how are things going?
Where in the world is William San Diego? I am in Las Vegas right now. I am in the city that is just completely buzzing with like neon lights and casinos, ching, 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 ching sounds. I'm having a blast here. I've been here all day. I am in my way too nice for what I'm here for hotel room, and I hope the audio quality holds up. You never know if everyone starts downloading porn in the hotel at the exact same time. My connection might go to shit, but fingers crossed.
I have a feeling Vegas probably plans for that a little better than other cities. You think?
Well, not only that, I feel like most of the time when I go to a work conference, I'm staying at the hotel with everybody there for the work conference, and you get this like window of time, like 7 to 9, because that's the time when people are downloading their porn before they go to bed. But here, all of the people in this particular hotel, they're for like 5 different conventions, all on different schedules. There's going to be people that are going to start their gambling at like 1 a.m. So everyone's schedules are so off anyways that I don't think it's going to create that same bottleneck.
Yeah, I think you'll be okay. Although if you do suddenly disappear, we're going to assume you got disconnected, gave up, and pulled up Tumblr over cellular instead.
Or just went gambling.
I have already put my $20. I've donated my $20 to the Cosmopolitan Casino. It went into the penny slots, and I kissed it goodbye.
There you go. I guess what happens in Vegas really does stay in Vegas.
How much time on the penny slots does $20 buy you these days?
Normally, it goes super fast. Like you put your $20 in, and just like
bing, bing, bing.
Moments. It can maybe last like a few minutes. I ended up, when I got down to like about $8, I won another 17 to put me up to like 26. And then I was like, well, I don't want to cash out for $6 plus $6.
Just more fun.
So then I burned all of that down. So because I like had like a quote unquote jackpot, it extended my maybe about 15 minutes. I had about 15 minutes.
There you go.
But not much longer than that.
Well, we also want to give a big shout out. I see a bunch of you guys are jumping on with us right now. You're listening live via the magic of YouTube. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you guys with us. Don't forget to say hello in the live chat. If you've got some thoughts on Paddington 2 or Call Me By Your Name as we're discussing the films, feel free to weigh in with your thoughts as well. Maybe we'll give you a shout out on the air here. Already see a couple of folks. Steve Sosa, who says, what happens in Vegas? Willie's pretty sure you haven't heard that today. I just said it, so I guess you have. But Benji Boy is with us as well. Welcome, Benji, and a couple other folks who haven't said hi yet. So make sure, drop your salutations in the chat. We'd love to say hello to you guys. And if you were listening through the magic of digital tape delay, through the power of iTunes and Stitcher Radio, whether it's the day the show comes out, a couple days from now relatively, or gosh, even a few years from now, because people are still finding our back catalog. It happens no matter when you're listening. We heart you. You can't see the heart shape I'm making because you're listening and not watching, but just trust that I made one. Jim, Will, you can verify my heart shape, right?
Absolutely. He's doing it. He's making it.
He's got a heart on.
Either that or he's, giving a double hand job. I can't tell which one.
Why not?
Or
Right?
if you're girthy, that's just a single hand job.
Except usually where you curve it in is on the bottom of the shaft, not
whatever.
the top.
Whatever.
Anyway.
Everybody has their own style.
Well, guys, we have 2 big movies to talk about tonight. Lots and lots to discuss. How do you feel about jumping right in?
That would be quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Excellent. Well, then we're going to kick things off with our discussion of Paddington 2 before we officially segue and Jim adds the trailer in later in post for those of you listening via iTunes and Stitcher. We're going to talk about Paddington 2 and Call Me By Your Name completely spoiler-free for the first 10 minutes or so, and then we'll give you plenty of warning before we open the can of spoiler worms. So if you haven't seen either movie, you were just hanging on for a recommendation. If you're not, you can get that. And then when we do open up spoilers, we'll give you enough time to hit pause, mute us, and come back. Whatever you need to do, feel free. But we will protect your virginal innocence as much as we can. But at a certain point, the responsibility is on you. So just keep that in mind. All that said, guys, spoiler plate warning is complete. Here we go. Our discussion of Paddington 2. All right, so Jim, you were a big fan of the first Paddington movie, and I know you were really excited for this sequel to come out. So seems fitting that you kind of kick us off. Catch us up a little bit. What's going on? Spoiler free, of course, with Paddington these days. And is it worth checking out in theaters? Maybe waiting for rental or Netflix, or even skipping? What do you think?
Well, yeah, Paddington 2 is a little bit about the movie first. And you're right, Brad. I was really excited for Paddington 2. I really loved the Paddington movie that came out in 2014. It was one of those movies where, yeah, hey, I'm going in. This is a kid's movie. I don't expect much, but maybe there's something a little bit there to make it stand out. And man, was I really surprised. And I love that movie. It's I think we bought it on Blu-ray at some point, but yeah, this was the Paddington 2 as Paddington 1 was directed by Paul King. It stars Ben Whishaw as the voice talent for Paddington, and then a bunch of live action actors playing characters. We have Sally Hawkins in this one that we saw recently in The Shape of Water. Has Hugh Bonneville. Has Imelda Staunton in this one. Hugh Grant has Brendan Gleeson is in this one. So this one has a lot of familiar faces, a lot of great talent acting in this one. Let me give you a quick rundown of the plot for this one. So Paddington, who's our favorite bear from darkest Peru, he has now settled in with the Brown family, who has kind of adopted him, and he lives there. He's also kind of been accepted into the community for the most part. We could talk about some of that too. And he's starting to pick up odd jobs. And his goal in this movie, which kicks off the plot, is that he is wanting to buy the perfect present for his Aunt Lucy's 1000th birthday. His Aunt Lucy, being back in Peru, always wanted to come to London, but she's back in Peru, and Paddington writes to her often to kind of update her and give her a flavor of what's going on in London. So anyway, he's off and he's looking for the perfect gift. He finds that perfect gift, and only for it, and this is not a spoiler, it's all in the trailer, only for it to be stolen, and thus kicks off our plot. Yeah, I liked Paddington 2 quite a bit. I think it has pretty much the same level of magic for me as the first one did. I think the first one made maybe more of an impression on me because I was just kind of floored by it. And I guess my expectations were heightened going into Paddington 2. And it did meet those expectations. It brings the same kind of magic, wonder, Paddington's a very lovable character. He's very warm. He's very affable. He's kind of embodies a kind spirit. And I think that's, to me, what I think is it kind of stands out about this character. This is a movie that I would bring anybody in my family to. I would recommend to any friends. So yeah, this is a recommend for me. It's a high recommend for me, and it might come down to preference as to which Paddington you prefer, the first one or the second one. As I said, I think they both have the same magic. It's right in the same vein for me, and I think this is a really good movie.
So definitely a big recommend from you, Jim, it sounds like. And Will, I know we're going to get your thoughts coming up here in a second, but one of our friends here in the chat says, about Paddington 2, I'm sorry, but I just don't like animation films. Am I a bad person for it? Question to you guys. Does this count as an animation film since only one character technically is animated? What are your guys' thoughts?
I would say it does not count as an animated film. This is largely not an animated film. Some might argue that potentially it has less animation in it than some other movies that you consider live action. I mean, the main character, Paddington, is a computer-generated character in the movie. But I think that primarily the rest of the movie is live action. I mean, there's some effects, obviously. Every movie has effects. But I don't know if I'd put it in the realm of animated film. Maybe, and this movie may not be for everybody. I mean, as I said, this is primarily a movie, I think, kind of at least outwardly aimed at children and a younger audience, because that's, I think, where its sensibilities are. But it also appeals to a wide range of people, kind of like any other Pixar movie coming out, like Coco. I mean, you could say that the Pixar movies are for kids, but they're really not. They're for everybody. And if the entertainment is good, as it is in this movie, I think it'll appeal to a wide audience. What do you guys think about the animation thing?
I might say I would agree with you, because when I think of an animated film, I think about animation has a particular art style, right? Whether it be Disney Pixar, those tend to have a style versus like Disney princesses versus like a stylish anime versus something that's going for kind of cutesy, cartoony. All of those are different animation styles. And while this is a computer-generated bear, the style they're going for is as hyper-realistic as they can get. And so set against real characters and along those things, they're not trying to elevate a particular art style. They're trying to hide any of the artistic elements so that it looks as real to life as possible. So I think of this character almost like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, who is a fully animated character in this very real world who is designed to look as well as the technology could be as real as possible. Now, that said, I think that you might say that, like maybe if it's not animated, I still don't like kids style movies. And I think that's where this falls into that category. Like some of the story tropes and elements that you might expect from a kids movie are here, or from an animated movie would be here. So that's live action, but I get it.
Yeah. And I think I can kind of agree with both of you in this case. I mean, certainly 95% of the movie is live action, but you do have sort of that animated component, and it follows sort of the patterns of like an animated film. Like I could totally see this being 100% completely animated, but I actually love that it's not. For me, like it actually enhances the movie in a way that we have actors like Sally Hawkins and Brendan Gleeson in here that are more than just a voice going with art. You know what I mean? Like I love that, and it has its place. But I think this sort of enhances it a little bit for me. But Will, I want to unpack things a little bit with you in terms of your initial thoughts here. Is Paddington 2, given its child audience and sensibilities, something that resonated with you or not so much?
So the first Paddington movie, I think we all came out of 2015 saying like this movie that sort of came out of nowhere and had like production issues and like recasting and stuff like that somehow ended up being one of the best movies of that year. I don't think it quite cracked top 10 lists, but it was one that I think we all thought about very heavily by end of year. And so I came into this one with that same elevated sense of excitement that that I had from experiencing the first one. And this one met and exceeded all of those expectations. Paddington 2 is a remarkably charming movie. I've only seen like 7 like 2018 releases because there's still a lot of like 2017 films that we're still watching. And I dare say this is the best of those movies so far. Like this is currently sitting #1 of the year. Granted, we're 3 weeks into January, so whatever. I think part of it is because this movie is incredibly aware of what it is. This film is charming and sweet, and it exudes kindness at every corner. And that could be a little saccharine sweet because that's not the type of thing that I would normally like say, like, oh, this movie is incredibly kind, go watch it. But it's because this movie is so self-aware with its kindness, it's genuine. And so all of the humor comes from this experience of this ultra kind bear in this world that reacts and responds to his kindness generally positively, although he does certainly have some obstacles that we'll get to. I think this is the type of film that's especially helpful. Like, news and politics suck right now. Like, there's a lot of like just like shitty stuff happening out there, and so it was a delight to spend like a couple of hours with this character in this world with his family and his friends, and even the characters that he interacts with, like his adversaries, are charming in their own way. There's just so much to like and to appreciate about this film. I love Paddington 2. I would very strongly recommend it to just about anyone, whether it be like, you know, whether you like kids movies or not. I think this movie knows what it is and just does what it does so damn well that just as a film fan, I think it's worth watching.
So 2 big recommends, it sounds like. Then, gosh, I have the unfortunate business, I guess, of raining on the Paddington parade a little bit. You know, I enjoyed the first movie a lot, and I definitely recognize that I am not the target audience for this film. I don't know, guys. This was really sleepy for me. Like, I got a lot of the saccharine cute from the first movie, and I expected that in the second movie as well. And I think this movie tries to do something a little different by introducing sort of this, like, caper thing going on. And, oh, no, Paddington is, you know, in trouble. And what's going to happen? And how's that going to resolve? And we can talk more about it in spoilers. But, I mean, just the way it's set up is very, very predictable, I guess, in the way that it kind of plays out. And, you know, at the beginning of the movie, pretty much how the movie is going to end. But I will say, even though it was a little paint by the numbers, even though it, you know, it was a little bit boring, there were still some things that I really appreciated here. I think the animation for Paddington has improved over the last 3 years. Some of the clunky CGI that we got in the first film wasn't as clunky for me in this one. Specifically, I don't know if you guys remember in the first one, there's a scene where like Nicole Kidman is chasing Paddington on the outside of like an England castle or something, and he's like jumping from like spire to spire, and like the ragdoll physics are like super weird when he jumps. This time around, when we see him doing jumps and stuff, the only way I can think to say it is he just seems weightier. Like, he seems more like a pear-shaped bear that eats marmalade all the time and is trying to do acrobatic things and not doing them very well. So I was very impressed visually. This movie kind of approaches like Wes Anderson levels of like weirdness, especially there's a like a prison setting at one point, like with a bunch of prisoners, and we get a flash of them in the trailer, so I feel okay bringing it up. But it's just a little like Wes Anderson-y, how like they're all dressed and how they're all posed just so and set up. And I I don't know. That didn't really work very well for me because I'm not a huge fan of Wes Anderson, but definitely this movie is charming. I loved seeing Sally Hawkins here again. I feel like, we got some great Sally Hawkins goodness in The Shape of Water. Now we're getting another movie with her right away. Really good to see her here. I did have to laugh at a couple points, and we can talk about it.
I know what you're talking about because Scott looked at me and said the same thing that I think you're gonna say.
I'm like, are we getting fish stick in this movie? Please no. But you guys mentioned a couple other folks, Brendan Gleeson, of course, Hugh Grant, who, man, he's not aging very well. It took me a couple of minutes to realize it was Hugh Grant because I typically don't read who's going to be in movies and stuff a lot sometimes if it's not like a big movie that's on my radar. So I had no idea he was going to be the main bad guy in this film. But Ben Whishaw, of course, is a delight as Paddington. And I just want to give a shout out to Peter Capaldi, who has ended his time on the TARDIS in Doctor Who. Good to see him here again as the curmudgeonly. What was he, the head of the neighborhood watch or something in this film?
Yeah, right? Neighborhood watch guy.
Yeah, whatever.
Who doesn't like bears?
Right.
So he's not welcome on this show.
Yeah, yes.
Capaldi.
Yeah, yes. Speaking of bears, this movie had quite a few bears outside of Paddington himself. In said prison scene, there's a bunch of husky, hairy, huggable, homorific dudes who were giving me the vapors, especially what was his name? T-Bone. Well, we'll talk more about it in spoilers, but
yeah, I looked him up and then I'm like, oh yeah, I remember the movie he was in.
Yeah, I'm like, haven't I seen him naked in a Bear Films movie? And then I was like, oh no, it was actually something else. But then it was like, oh, but I want to see him naked in a Bear Films movie. In any event, I mean, I would recommend this if you're looking for something cute, maybe a cute date movie. This could be fun. But there are some other really phenomenal films out right now that I would say if you have to choose between this and something else that's getting a lot of buzz, you may want to wait for Netflix on this one and pick something else. But mileage varies. I mean, taste varies.
Yeah.
So
and that's fine. You hit on something that I think needs to be, could definitely be repeated. Is I see this movie as kind of like an antidote to a lot of the real crappiness that's going on right now. A lot of it is reflected in movies too. I mean, look at something like 3 Billboards and just ugly. They're great movies, great films, and they serve their purpose, but it's really heavy, ugly, dirty stuff. And this is kind of like a breath of fresh air. If I had young kids, I mean, I'd have no question bringing them to a movie like this over anything from the Minions. I mean, think of another, that is an animated movie. But I mean, as far as kids movies go, I put this kind of in a league with with the Pixar films. I mean, they've got this one has, I think, a very positive message. I think it does kind of follow this, and this is one little knock I have against it. It does kind of follow the same exact beats. The plot is pretty simplistic in terms of a villain and what they're trying to do, and you kind of know where it's going to go at the end, and everything that's going to be thrown in Paddington's way to get there. So all those you have to work through all those machinations, some of which are really fun, but yeah, and maybe I think expecting something different out of this movie maybe isn't fair, because they are working with source material that is, the Paddington stories, and they are the Paddington stories. And I bet you if you work through those stories and those books, I bet the Adventures of Paddington are pretty much structured in similar ways. So hard to fault the movie for that. I just think it's very well done. I love all the performances in this. I think some of the animation sequences are great. Not animation, but the action sequences, I guess, are great. Like I said, I'm a fan. Brad, I know it didn't quite work its magic on you as much. But that's too bad.
One thing I will say in Paddington 2's defense, and Will, I don't know if this will maybe make more sense to you. I have been like laid up with a back injury, and thankfully it's almost 100% better now. But while I was down for the count, I started a Steven Universe rewatch, and Steven Universe is so sweet and saccharine and good-hearted too. But I couldn't help, and I think it's because I was binging Steven Universe during this movie. I'm like, oh, Paddington's being sweet, but like, man, they really could have made it so much more emotional by doing something like they did on Steven Universe. And so maybe that was causing me to make some unfair, like, mental comparisons in a way. I don't know.
Yeah, because, and I get that. For me, what I think worked so well about this is that the sweetness of this movie, and, you know, we keep using that phrase, you know, is really based. It's very character motivated. This character is the Paddington character is almost entirely without guile, which is refreshing because when you see him interact with characters who do have some semblance of guile, he has to work through that in a way that other kind of. I think we're used to seeing our protagonists and things being kind of super sly and slick and trying to like outmaneuver and outthink people, and in this one. The character is faced with this thing that happens because of this character that gets the better of him, and he then has to sort of work through it, but in his own way.
Right.
I also appreciated the humor so much in this one. A lot of kids' movies don't tickle my funny bone. This one did. Like, I found myself like literally laughing out loud on numerous occasions. That was refreshing, and all of the humor. So I saw this one at the Cinemark. And so beforehand, there were 4 animated movie trailers that played for other things that are coming out. 3 of those 4 movies, just in the trailer, I don't even know what the rest of the movies are going to be like, but just in the trailer featured extended fart jokes. And that was the like, and so I'd already gotten like 3 fart jokes just through the fucking trailers. And I love that that's not the basis of this humor. It's the humor in this was based off this character and the family, each one with their own thing that is a part of the story as well. I love that so much. I love character-based humor. I love character-based reactions to things. And I love that we can make kids' movies that can be simple, that can be, you know, they don't have to be overly complex things. But that we can have a simple story without it being base or even debased, like with like dumb fart jokes. That's I think the magic of this movie.
Yeah, definitely nice to have a kids movie that doesn't rely on toilet humor in order to tickle the funny. I'd rather have my funny bone tickled with marmalade than, you know, farts. So so for those of you who tuned into the show for the Call Me By Your Name review, fret not. We're going to get to that in about 10 or 15 minutes, but we are going to go ahead and open up the floor for some spoilers for Paddington 2. I don't know that we have a ton to talk about, but, you know, we want to spoil it a little bit. So this is where I awkwardly ramble to give you time to hit mute. If you're listening live, come back in about 10 or 15 minutes. Join us for Call Me By Your Name. If you're listening through digital tape delay on iTunes and Stitcher, use the handy-dandy time index in the show notes to skip ahead as desired. But spoilers for Paddington 2 are officially fair game. Where do you guys want to start?
Go ahead, Will.
Oh,
good.
I was going to say, there's really only, for me, and maybe I'm missing something, but there's really only 2 spoiler-based things to talk about, and one of which is our villain, played by Hugh Grant, and some of the things that he does, and the other of which is Paddington's time in prison. Maybe I'm missing something else major too, but those are the 2 biggies. I liked Hugh Grant in this one, and I think this is why, if, like, gun to my head, like, I had to choose between Paddington and Paddington 2, I think I liked this one better because I liked the flamboyance and just how memorable this villain was a little bit more than the villain in the first one. It's choosing between 2 favorite children at a certain point. But Hugh Grant plays this like washed up actor. He does these like dog food commercials in this like furry pup play costume. And he has all of these like over the top personas that he uses. For each of his little like master schemes as he kind of breaks into this as a nun or as the Pope. or as a hobo, and each one has its own characters because he's master thespian. I thought that was fun. You know, for a kids movie, like all you need is the villain to just be opposed to the hero and to have something memorable about them. This character had exactly that. Like whenever he was on screen, it felt justified when he went over the top because it was every scene of him up to that point had built on, you know, like this is how this character reacts to things. So, you know, Hugh Grant's maybe not aged super well, but I think he did. I do think that he nailed this performance with just how over the top he needed to be.
Yeah, I mean, I was fine with Hugh Grant in the role. I think I'm a little bit the other side of this villain. I think I kind of liked Nicole Kidman's villain a little bit more. There was a little more edge, I think, to her than to the Hugh Grant villain. He just seemed a little, I don't know, just a little kind of boring. I know he had all his personas that he put on and stuff like that. I did kind of like the kind of like treasure hunt aspect of, you know, going through the book and finding the note. That I kind of liked. But yeah, you know, this villain I don't think was quite as strong as the Nicole Kidman, at least for me. But I thought Hugh Grant did fine. One of the things I want to talk about is the very end of this film. So one of the things that to me is the emotional anchor for this movie is the fact that Paddington is a fish out of water here in London, right? Being from Peru, being from the jungle, the only family he has left is back in the jungle. And then, of course, at the end of this movie, they reunite him with his Aunt Lucy, who comes from the jungle here. And as heartwarming as that scene was, I almost wish they hadn't done that. It seems like it's like, oh, great. Now where are they going to get the emotional, you know, where are they going to get the emotional center for the next movie if there isn't that longing to be, you know, back with his aunt and stuff like that? And that was
I have an answer for you.
Yeah, go ahead. They're going to kill her.
So in the next movie, Aunt Lucy is going to become very, very sick. And the only cure for her is a plant that she was just eating all the time in the jungles of Peru that just doesn't exist in London. So Paddington and the family, the Browns, all together are going to have to go to Peru for an adventure to get the plant that will save Aunt Lucy's life.
Wow. Have you been reading the Paddington stories? I bet that could very well be it. I don't know.
It could also
not read it in any book, but I think it could work.
It could also be that they just I don't know that the Aunt Lucy character is there to stay as much as they brought her to visit type thing. And so for me, when I think about like, yeah, if she's permanently there, I think that does impact some of the emotional resonance of future ones. But my takeaway from the film was it was more like a visit, and because of that, it became emotional payoff for me instead. Like we had this, you know, this longing to like, you know, like I love this new life, but like I live in London, but you know, Aunt Lucy always wanted to see it. Because of Paddington and through all of the connections that he made, the Browns couldn't have afforded that by themselves, but everyone pitching in together, and they only were able to do that because they loved Paddington so much. That was what was able to get Lucy to live her dream and come visit London. So that's where I had a little bit more resonance with it, just thinking of it as like a temporary visit.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing, though. I mean, Paddington and the Browns have huge grounds for a lawsuit against, you know, the municipal system of England. So you never know. Maybe they're going to become bazillionaires, and Aunt Lucy's going to have a permanent room in the new home.
Paddington 3, all the Browns and Paddington and their entire community are now very rich. And so they've moved into the wealthy part of town. And with that, each one of the family members is able to indulge in their passions and what excites them in a way that they weren't able to before. But in doing so, Paddington notices that they're disconnected from the things that made them them, and he has to reconnect them with their true sense of self back in their home street.
I think those ideas could definitely work. The emotional beat at the end, the emotional beat at the end worked fine for me. But the one that there's two in this movie that I thought were extremely well done. One was very early on in the movie when he discovers the book, when he first discovers a book, and that was an animated sequence that I thought was fantastic.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah, going through the book and the different things, the pop-up book. It's a pop-up book of London and all the things, and it kind of puts him and his aunt in the story. I thought that was great. And then there's another scene that's very much like another scene in the first movie where, and this time he's in the jail cell and he's crying because the Browns didn't get to visit him, and he thinks that they've abandoned him in there. And I think he falls asleep, but he imagines that he's back in the jungle and, in the room very briefly. And there was a scene just like that in the first movie where he was watching the movies that they discovered from the Explorer. They put on the film and they're watching it, and he kind of walks through the screen and he's back in the jungle again. To me, those were those scenes wrecked me, those two scenes. And then but yeah, and so when they reunited him with his Aunt Lucy at the end, I'm like, oh, like we're not gonna. I don't know if that longing is still gonna be there in the next movie. So we shall see.
Indeed. Let's talk about the prison scene real quick. So this is kind of the second half of the movie, right, where Paddington goes to jail because Hugh Grant and all his different actor, accoutrement was able to pin the theft of the book on Paddington. That's where we meet Brendan Gleeson, who's the head of the Bear Brigade in prison. And of course, we get that fun musical number with Hugh Grant at the end, where all of the dancers are bears. Did all that prison stuff work for you guys? Was that fun, or did it make the movie drag on? What are your thoughts?
Me personally, spoiler alert, this was a 5-star movie for me. So the prison scene I thought was equally charming and interesting, because it's where we have Paddington was a fish out of water in the first movie. In this one, he's so good at like being a lovable character that it would have been weird if like the neighborhood was still like not on his side. And so the fact that he's in his element at the beginning of this movie makes sense. In the prison, he starts off as a fish out of water again. Like, he messes up the laundry, and now they're wearing like pink and black stripes, and instead of the white and black stripes. Yeah, what's that?
Joe Arpaio's Tent City prison here in Arizona.
Oh, God, yeah. And so just the fact that like he went from like, man, like I think they're gonna shiv Paddington, to just kind of nicing his way through the situation. And this is a world that, like, this is not the world that Paddington lives in is not exactly our world. Like, people respond to kindness. That's the other part of the magic. It's not just that Paddington is a kind character, but it's that people respond positively to kindness. And I think that's one of the appealing things about this movie, and one of the appealing things about this prison movie. It could have gone bitter. It could have gone. It could have made a lot of jokes about just like Paddington just barely not getting killed multiple times by like, a bunch of malicious guys. But instead, Paddington's able to do what Paddington does best, which is make friends and improve people's lives. I loved the prison sequence. I loved those characters. The Brendan Gleeson character had a bunch of just sort of like he stole that portion of the movie for me, and part of it's because Brendan Gleeson's so damn good.
He is good. He is good.
And it's a good thing that Brendan Gleeson and the homies show up at the end. It saves, Fish Stick from having to swim up and free Paddington.
Yeah, the underwater sequence.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, Scott leaned over to me and said, "This is like Shape of Water." I'm like, I know, I see it too.
Yeah, we did the same thing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I saw it last night and had my flight this morning. All I could think of for the rest of the movie was, I cannot wait to Photoshop this. I need to Photoshop Paddington over the asset in the Shape of Water poster where they're underwater. Like I that's so look for that. Like, that is going to be a time waster I indulge in later on this week.
Nice. Jim, any final thoughts on Paddington before we move on?
No, like I said, I really enjoyed it, and I think it's definitely worth people's time. It's already, like I said, getting a lot of attention. It's again, it's one of the highest rated movies ever on Rotten Tomatoes at this point, I think. So, not that that matters. Excuse me, not that that matters too much to everybody, but it's a quality piece of cinema. We don't see movies like this. I'm just glad we got it instead of another shitty Minions movie.
Don't worry, we still have Romeo and Juliet. Our kids animated movies that are coming out soon.
That was one of the fart movies, I bet.
Yeah, there's an extended one where it's Minion style humor. They have a gnome whose name is Mankini, whose thing is he wears a mankini and his ass hangs out, and all of the jokes are about him farting or showing his butt. And I'm sorry, but like we can do better with our humor than that, right?
I think we can. All right. Well, guys, we are going to go ahead and put a pretty little bow on Paddington 2. We've got another film to discuss this week, and it's a big one. So we're going to go ahead and make that transition to Call Me By Your Name. If you haven't seen Call Me By Your Name yet, and you're on the fence, should you see it, should you not, we're going to give you some spoiler-free thoughts. We'll let you know what we think, and then we'll give you a fair warning before we open up that big old can of spoilers. All that said, Jim, Will, are you ready to go back to the 80s in a small little Italian villa by the sea?
I'm ready.
Yes, let's do it.
Then here we go. Our discussion of Call Me By Your Name. Doot, 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 doot. So, Will, I know this is a movie you got to see long before we did because of the release schedule and how it was only in limited spots before it went wider. And this was one that you had actually plugged, I think, on the show before. So seems fitting that you kind of open this discussion up and just kind of remind folks, what is Call Me By Your Name? What's the whole controversy about? Maybe if you want to touch on that for a second, is this worth checking out? What are your feelings?
Thanks, Will. So Call Me By Your Name is a new... Yeah,
you're welcome.
It's a new movie by Luca Guadagnino, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, so apologies. It's set in the early 80s in northern Italy. You have Timothée Chalamet, who has had a hell of a year between this and Lady Bird, and he was in Miss Stevens last year as well. So he's just like, he is popping off right now. As the 17-year-old...
Never mind. Hide the fruit.
Yeah, we'll get to that. He's a 17-year-old who is way advanced for his age. You know, like this is a kid who speaks like 4 languages, who writes music for fun, and who enjoys bicycling around the Italian countryside. His father is a professor, and he brings on Oliver, played by Armie Hammer, as his research assistant one summer. Over the course of several weeks, Oliver and Elio, which is the Timothée Chalamet character, develop a bond that is both friendly and sexual and romantic. So the controversy to this is a 17-year-old in a relationship with a 24-year-old. And I know people who, and I get this, you know, it's like people draw their own line in the sand, and I get that, who have said, well, I don't want to support pedophilia. And I get that. And I have some strong counter thoughts on that one too. But the other big thing that's happening about this is this movie is going to be up for several Oscars. It is got a wonderful score, beautiful direction, a wonderful story with 3 dynamo performances actually, with Michael Stuhlbarg as Chalamet's father. We are going to see this thing get nominated for several things. And in a year where like the Me Too movement and all of that is a big thing, I can see why people would want to be on guard against things that exploit minors. The thing that throws me about this a little bit is if I'm just speaking completely ethically and completely like from a legal sense, you know, the age of consent in Italy is much younger than it is here. And so there are different cultural norms. But that said, in I want to say that it's the majority of the United States, including Texas. The age of consent is 17. So even if this relationship happened like next door to me, there's nothing like legally wrong with it. So I put all of that into the stew as well. When at least for my sentiments with this movie, this is a must-see movie, and I think we picked a hell of an episode because sometimes we come in here and we're talking about like, what are we going to talk about? Like, I guess we'll do this one because it's the thing on there. Like, the two movies that we picked are getting a ridiculous amount of social media buzz, and this is sort of a powerhouse episode with these two sort of positioned back to back. This was in my top 10 list for last year, deservedly so. Wonderful movie. If it is playing in your area, please, please, please go see Call Me by Your Name.
All right. So, Will, this is definitely a big one for you. And it's interesting, the controversial nature of this film, because I can think of at least 3 people off the top of my head who have said, I refuse to see this movie because it's all about pedophilia. And you certainly make a good point about the legal age limit. And in Italy, it's even more different. In Italy, the age of consent is 14. Right. Unless it's like a teacher or a police officer, someone in a position of authority, then it's 16. So I think it's kind of hard for us sometimes to wrap our brains around that too. But I think if you see this film purely from just an artistic like appreciation, even though there's the creepy age thing for you, maybe there's a lot here, and there's a lot to be discussed, I think, and it's one of the reasons why this movie is getting as much buzz as it is. I know for me, this was a film that, you know, based on the trailer, I was interested in seeing. So Jim, not every trailer makes me hate movies. But I was a little worried myself coming into this movie about the age difference. Not that there's a lot of difference like in just pure years from 17 to 24, but there's a lot of difference perhaps in experience level. And there's also a difference in terms of like how people who are older and have more experience sometimes lead an exchange or maybe try to pressure someone who is younger. And so I was afraid this was going to be very much like a
seduction
24-year-old trying to like play on an innocent 17-year-old boy or something. And oh boy, was I, you know, a little misguided there. I don't want to spoil anything, but I felt like this movie handled that controversial nature really, really well. I've started reading the book too. I'm only about 20% of the way through it. I give you page numbers, but it's Kindle. It just gives me a progress bar. But the book also does a good job, I think, of kind of framing it, but letting you make the decision for yourself. You're really just kind of seeing it play out, and then you kind of got to figure out how you feel from there. Timothée Chalamet, I think, is fantastic in this film at being an aggravated little brat that I hate sometimes, and then being this like vulnerable kid who like is trying to figure himself out that I love sometimes. Armie Hammer, who hasn't really been on my radar very much before. Jim's going to tell you it's all because of so much hairy chest action in this movie. Laying on the beach, that's why I'm interested. Yes, that's true to some degree. But he has some acting chops that I did not know Armie Hammer had. I really appreciated a lot of his performance here. Michael Stolberg, I think, was excellent here as the dad in this film. I think there's just, I don't know, there's so much here to love. Will, you mentioned the soundtrack. The score is certainly great, but some really fitting songs were picked. And I'm interested to get more into those in spoilers, but I gotta tell you, for anyone that's on the fence about this movie, even if you think the whole like age different things might be kind of creepy or weird for you, see it and decide for yourself. Don't just kind of sit on that and be like, well, I'm not gonna do it. Give it a chance, even if it's $7 at a matinee or something. If you're midway through the movie and you're creeped out and you don't like it, leave. That's fine. But at least form your own opinion before you jump on that bandwagon, is my feeling. So that makes 2 huge recommends. Jim, what about you?
Yeah, I'm going to jump on the bandwagon. I went to see this movie because, hey, it was in the conversation as one of the best movies of the year. I wanted to see it. Ever since I saw the first trailer and knew that it was coming out and saw who was in it and kind of saw the tone of this movie, I knew that I really wanted to see this. I knew it was a small, has a very much indie feel to it. Armie Hammer, who is an actor I do really like. We saw him in a movie called Free Fire back at South by. I did not care for Free Fire, but he was the best thing in it for me. I mean, his character, and he can really carry off a lot of different range. I mean, I've seen in Free Fire, he's more of a comedic. His comedic timing is pretty darn good. He doesn't get a chance to do a lot of that here. It's pretty much played, there is some subtle humor between the characters. What stood out about this movie was, yes, I knew it was a gay relationship movie, but this movie feels just kind of like the feel of this movie just kind of surrounds you and like makes you feel like super comfortable. Like you are on a summer vacation with these characters in this village in Italy somewhere in the hills with, beautiful lakes and streams that you can go swimming in. You can ride bikes, you can ride into the village and it's just that whole tone and feeling I thought was pulled off very well. And I agree with what you guys say. Everybody draws their own moral line. We could talk about the legalities, but I think the people who have a moral issue with this movie aren't going to be swayed by the legal argument. I think some people have moral issues with big age differences, even if it isn't a minor involved.
That's true.
And I've seen that come across on social media already. Like even if the younger person is well of age and there's an older person involved, they automatically, I think that there's some kind of power play involved here. And in this movie, as you pointed out, Brad, that is absolutely not the case. This is not the case of an adult applying his power over an influence over a younger person to make them have affections for them. I think it's very organic. Elio, the Timothée Chalamet character, is played very well as he's a typical teenager. He doesn't have much experience. He's kind of exploring his own sexuality, and I don't want to spoil much, but it's not clear in this movie if he's homosexual or if he's heterosexual. And that kind of reveals itself as the movie goes along. But yes, I love this movie. There's a lot I want to talk about it. But yeah, I think people need to see this. I'd urge people, if they can possibly do it, give this movie a chance. Check it out. I have a few minor gripes in the movie, but I'll wait till spoilers till we get to those.
All right. So, Jim, I want to ask you a question real quick. And Will, the only reason I'm not directing it to you is because this movie was already in your top 10 list. Jim, you and I gave a caveat last week for our top 10 films of 2017 that we reserved the right to change our list because we couldn't see this movie until after we made that list. Do you think this movie edges anything out on your list? Did it change anything for you, or did it remain the same?
I think it would barely edge something out at the bottom of my top 10 list. That's kind of where I would put this movie. It's not my favorite movie of the year. And we'll talk maybe why that is, but it definitely would have made the bottom of my top 10.
So a gay movie made your bottom.
Yeah.
Gotcha. For me, this, and I only bring this up because I hope it will maybe sway people to see this film. I had my top 10 constructed. Jim, I know it didn't really change yours much. But for me, this pushed literally every movie in my top 10 down one slot. So this became my number one film of 2017. And I'll talk about some of the reasons why when we get into spoilers here in about 25 seconds. But this is one of those movies I feel, for me, just kind of took me really by surprise. And if I had kind of let my aversion to the age play thing, whatever, factor into that, I probably would not have seen the movie that is now my favorite movie of last year. So Just putting that out there for maybe anyone in that spot. Guys, are we ready for spoilers? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think at this point, people know if they're going to see this or not. I just hope that, I mean, all three of us, Jim, it sounds like this one probably does make your top 10, but just like barely,
Does
right?
barely. Yep. Does barely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we talked last week about how there was only one film that was on all three of our top 10 lists, and that was Three Billboards.
Mm-hmm.
And so this movie would have been the second film to make all three of our top 10 lists. All three of us liked it so much to elevate it to that standard. So if someone's listening going, yeah, but I don't know if I want to watch that because, only one of them liked this, or only two, like all three of us with all three of our different personalities and different tastes all elevate this movie. So yeah, I think that speaks volumes for its quality.
Will, it's kind of like playing the penny slots and watching bar pop up 3 times in a row and winning your $17.
I know something about that.
All right. Well, we are going to go ahead and open up the floor for spoilers for Call Me By Your Name. If you have not yet seen the movie and you value your virginal innocence in regards to its finer plot points, now is your time to step away for 25 minutes or so, and come on back for plugs at the end of the show. If you're listening live, make a sandwich, put us on mute, whatever. If you're listening through iTunes or Stitcher Radio, Jim has lovingly crafted a handy-dandy time index that's in the show notes. Depending on the app you're using, you may even be able to click the time signature and automatically skip ahead. Technology is amazing. It's come so far since I listened to podcasts on my iPod Classic in 1997. Anyway, enough awkward rambling. Spoilers for Call Me By Your Name are officially fair game. Where do you want to start?
I'll start. I had mentioned I hate to start negative, but I love the nature of this love story. One of the things that kind of maybe kept me not at arm's length, but a little bit away from being fully emotionally engaged was that neither character either came off as or was played as very affable or likable to me. The Elio character seemed like a pretty typical teenager kind of type, like, knew everything, was kind of not very, kind of mopey around. The Armie Hammer character, and they mentioned this in the movie, came off as quite arrogant, even though maybe he wasn't, but he did come off that way as like so confident that he kind of leaned toward the arrogant, I guess you could say.
Later.
I think, later. And then it just kind of kept me from really kind of embracing one or both of these characters. They did form something very beautiful by the end of the movie, and maybe that's the journey that the movie wants me to go on with these characters. But as characters, I don't know. I didn't, just not very, very approachable to me.
I think some of that is by design, because part of what drives the first third of this movie maybe is once Chalamet begins his infatuation with Armie Hammer, there's a stretch of this movie where the Armie Hammer character, we don't get a chance to really see inside of his mind. We don't get to see kind of how he's responding to things. He's a bit of a mystery to the Chalamet character. And so as he's sort of prodding and feeling his way through these experiences, he doesn't know if it's going to be reciprocated or not, or how it's going to be received. And I think some of Armie Hammer's aloofness is intentional there, because I think if we did connect more to that character and we knew how he was going to respond, I think it would have taken away from that very true, like the very true part of the story, which is like with your first love, it's awkward and it's clumsy and you're afraid of putting yourself out there, but then you just kind of do. And then it sits there on the table and you're terrified about, like, in those like 2 seconds that feel like an eternity before the person answers. Like, I think that's what worked so well. I did maybe have a little bit of an emotional attachment with another character. And again, I'm thinking about like tiniest of quibbles because I mean, I really like this movie. I felt like some of the stuff with the Chalamet's girlfriend was just a little long. Like maybe they spent a little bit too much time with that character, and she didn't have enough development for me to really like just be super into kind of some of the resolution that she gets a little later in the movie. That's a quibble. It's not her story, so she doesn't have to be super developed. But you know, if I'm nitpicking anything, I'd sort of nitpick over there a little bit more.
Wow, watch out, Will. I've already heard a lot of pushback on the way this movie handles the female characters. So that's tender territory about how how the movie kind of leaves, you know, treats the female character. I thought it wrapped up okay, but I don't know. It could be seen either way. And I think part of my sorry for talking for so long, Brad. You're going to get in here in a minute. Part of my detachment is I see these people as, I mean, they're obviously well-to-do, rich, kind of Ivy League preppy, you know, white bread characters, and they just didn't seem that interesting to me from that point of view. I don't know. It's with all the stuff going on today, I find it, I haven't seen anything yet that's kind of pushed back against that aspect of this story. Now, granted, it's a book and it's written and that's the way the story is and that's the characters. But, you know, these are obviously rich white people who have servants that, you know, that in this country house that I think it mentioned in the movie they inherited. So yeah, I don't know. Is this something? This definitely an upper class, upper crust shine to these characters, and I think that kind of kept me from getting emotionally attached.
I guess I can see that, but I think there's something endemic to the experience that the characters are going through, that whether they're white upper class or not, there's a resonance there. Like, Jim, I'm looking at the poster right behind you, Midnight, best movie of last year, right? And as I was watching Call Me by Your Name, I'm hearkening back to moments from Moonlight where characters are kind of going through a similar thing, right? Like, you know, if you are gay and you like someone, but you're not sure that they're gay, there's like fleeting touches, there's awkward glances. And, you know, if they catch you looking at them, then all of a sudden you're afraid that they're reading too much into your look. And now you're acting aloof and you push them away, even though the thing you want most is to bring them in closer. And that's a lot of what I saw happening between Oliver, the Armie Hammy character, and Timothée Chalamet's Elio, is they're both sort of locked in this dance of like, does he like me or does he not like me, right? Like Oliver at one point like tries to rub Elio's shoulder, right? Maybe he's gotten some signals from Elio. He thinks it's going to be okay. And the first thing Elio does is like pull his shoulder away, like, what the fuck are you doing, right? And like you can just tell from like the reactions on Elio's face, like he really wants this, but like he can't let himself have it at first, right? And so it just becomes, I was getting frustrated right along with the characters that like, good God, will you guys just like get to it already? Will you just fucking like admit what you're feeling to each other, drop the pretenses that you're using with each other, and just be together? But then I'm like, but that's not always like real life. Like this is realistic. And I think back to my experiences coming out in college. Now I'm the one doing a lot of talking. Sorry, guys. Before I came out, there was this guy who worked in the cafeteria, and he was the one that you'd like hand your ID card to, and he'd scan it to make sure your meal plan was in order. One time I like handed my card over, and we had been chatting every day that I would go in a little bit. And he took my card and he let his fingers brush against mine on the underside of the card. And he like rubbed my finger for a second before taking the card. And I am 100% positive now, looking back, that was him trying to signal me that like he was into me and it was okay. And if I was into him, we would do something. But when he touched me and rubbed my finger like that, I freaked out. And I'm not proud of this, but I stopped being so congenial with him when I saw him every day. And he ended up going to another residence hall, working somewhere else, never saw him again. But of course, I later came out and, started doing things with guys and became comfortable with myself. But I see a lot of myself in Elio and Elio's reactions. And I think that's one of the reasons why the movie was so incredibly powerful for me. Also, a little revisionist history. I wish I could have had the bravery to maybe explore some of that myself. So, Jim, I know they're white upper class characters, but I think the experience is maybe similar whether you're rich or poor. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, look at it. Hey, imagine if this movie wins. Let's say by some miracle this movie wins, is nominated and wins Best Picture of the Year. That'd be 2 gay coming-of-age movies 2 years in a row that have won Best Picture. That's pretty astonishing that we have such quality movies about, with gay coming-of-age stories. I think it's great.
And even if it doesn't win, I think it is. I mean, I'm in Vegas. I would put money on it being nominated. It's definitely on the short list of films that we're going to see there. And even if it doesn't take Best Picture, there are a couple of other slots that it could easily pick up awards for, and including Michael Stuhlbarg's supporting actor performance here, which is, to me, the break my face moment of the movie.
Yes.
I really want to get into this because I think that so much of what you hear about is about the Armie Hammer and the Timothée Chalamet characters, and they're great. They are absolutely great. They do what they need to do exquisitely. Both have a chance of being nominated in their roles. Especially Chalamet is probably going to get Best Actor nod. Hammer they're kind of talking about whether to put him in supporting actor or not, so I think he's going to be in a weird spot. But not enough is being said about Stuhlbarg's role as the father here. He is one of my favorite actors. He was the lead in one of my favorite films of all time, which is Coen Brothers' A Serious Man. And he gets to deliver like the monologue that I feel like actors dream about delivering. There is so much poignancy and so much emotion and so much. It's sort of like if this entire movie was, forgive the clumsy analogy, if this entire movie is all of this, like, will they, won't they, or how's the relationship going, or what's going to happen. If this entire movie is edging, like Stuhlbarg's moment where he speaks and brings resolution to everything is the climax.
It's the splooge all over your face.
Stuhlbarg filled the peach. It's that moment that I think, even on a rewatch, so I saw this one twice, there were moments that I enjoyed watching through it, but they were all just kind of like interesting or fun or beautiful or whatever moments. But the only time that I was like emotionally just like wham smacked was in that final scene from Stuhlbarg as he's talking to Chalamet. Both times it just completely destroyed me, and it only works because of all of the ramping up and just kind of the gentle and the subtle nuance and build up that happens through the rest of the movie.
Well, and it's so powerful because he's the cautionary tale, right? Like Elio, because Oliver has left at this point, they can no longer be together. Elio's feeling all of this pain, and it's like he's trying to wrap that pain up in a towel and throw it away, right? And the dad basically tells him, I know you're trying not to feel anything right now, but by not letting yourself feel anything, you will end up feeling nothing for the rest of your life. And basically he sort of comes out to his son, and Elio's like, does mom know? A reminder that even though he's gay, he got married. And he's like, no, I don't think that she does. And so that advice that he gives to Elio is even more poignant and powerful because, we don't know the dad's full backstory, but, he mentioned that he was in something similar one time and it didn't go the way that it went for Elio and Oliver. And so all of a sudden it recolors everything. And I can't wait to see this movie again, because there's certain points where I remember the dad like encouraging them to go like biking together in town or get out of the house. You guys go do something. And between him and the mom, who maybe does know about the dad, maybe doesn't, we don't know for sure. They were both so supportive of Elio, like going down this road with Oliver. And I don't know, that's it's amazing that parents in the 80s would be like that. Maybe it's because they are upper crust, affluent, rich white people in Italy. I don't know. But it was just, I don't know, that destroyed me in a good way, I guess, to see that.
Yeah, I mean, we got to remember this was in the early 80s, right? So things were maybe just at the beginning of really changing in terms of, I mean, coming out to your parents was a huge deal for a young kid that age back then. I mean, I think it's a huge deal anytime, right? I get that. But I think the public perception back then was not as accepting generally as it is today, even though it's nowhere close to where we want it. It was even worse back then. So that makes I mean, Michael Stolberg's monologue in this movie is fantastic. Probably one of the best scenes of the year. Will, I had the same reaction you did. I just wish we had, and maybe on a second viewing, I'll catch more of it. But it just seemed like he had that one like fantastic, great scene, and the rest was just bits and pieces here and there where it didn't, at least on first viewing, seem that important. He seemed like a very much kind of like just a character in the movie. So yeah, I don't know, best supporting actor, how they're going to give awards, whatever. But if they could give it for one monologue, like monologue of the year or scene of the year, that I would fully support. Yeah, I mean, I love, like I said, I loved pretty much everything about this movie except for the kind of those little tweaks I have. I also love the scene they had in the town square where they're kind of going around the way that was choreographed and photographed. I thought was fantastic. It's kind of like this little dance they do, and they're kind of talking in riddles to each other, but you know exactly what they're talking about. I thought that was a really cleverly written scene and very well portrayed on the screen. I thought that was fantastic too.
Absolutely. We have a comment in the chat from someone who read the book. He says Elio is actually asking his father if the mother knows about Elio and Oliver. And he says that's explicit in the book, not in the movie though. That's interesting for me to hear. And Jim, I think that was your take coming out of the movie, because I was like, oh my God, the dad's gay too. And you're like, no, so I don't know, maybe I misread that scene, but I thought it was pretty clear that the mom did know, because the mom came and picked him up and she was counseling him, after Oliver was gone. I mean, I felt like the movie made it clear that the mom knew. Will, maybe you can be the tiebreaker perspective. What did you think here?
Well, to be clear on the record before Will weighs in, that was my original take. But after you told me, oh no, he was asking if the mom knew about the dad and his previous experiences, and he said no. And I'm like, oh, that makes total sense, because we know from the movie that the mom pretty much knows. She kind of encouraged them to go off on a trip together, to wherever they went. So we kind of think that she knows, and maybe both parents know. And parents, by the way, have this sense about their kids, when it comes to their sexuality, or at least parents who are engaged with their kids kind of have a sense of that. And you could tell from just that little scene that they probably had conversations about this prior, and that we didn't see. But yeah, it's interesting that in the book, if it's very explicit that he's only talking about him and Elio and Oliver, and that the movie maybe kind of twisted that a little bit. I think that's pretty interesting.
And for me, I'll actually say that I read it the other way as well, that he was asking about if the mother knew about Oliver. Later in the movie, in kind of the final coda, we find out that the mother knows. But before that, I read that line as Elio asking about himself. And so that's what I got from the scene. I haven't read the book, so I don't know any of the support material about it. That was just my take.
Brad, I like Brad's take better though. Actually,
I think it's a fine. I think it's a fine take, and I think there is a lot that leads to. Even if I think where I ultimately fall on it is, I think Elio's line is not about the father, but is about himself. But I do think that some of the other subtext that's happening in that scene is still supporting the, something similar to this, like this happened to the father once upon a time. So I think that, I think that even if that line, and we could go back and forth on whether that one particular line references one or the other, but I don't think it changes the subtext of that conversation.
Isn't there even a question as to whether the father's previous experience was not with a guy? I mean, is that possible? He says, I had something similar, meaning maybe just his first love or his first heartbreak. Right. I don't know. Could have been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd have to watch this scene again, but it's in the midst of him giving advice to Elio, and I don't know. I just got the sense that the dad had a latent gay side that he pushed away because times were different, and he got married instead. And if that's not it, then I think that, yeah, the subtext is maybe there, but I think that robs a lot of the power from that scene for me. In fact, the more I think about it, the more it ruins that scene for me completely in my head, if that isn't, in fact, what it is versus what I thought it was.
That was going to be my next question. If that changed, how does that affect the movie for you? Because I think for me personally, I mean, because I didn't read it the same way as you, and that was the powerhouse scene for me. But yeah, that would. I mean, I don't want to bring up anything that will like impact your like number one movie of the year, because I love that you love it. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
But here's the beautiful thing about art, though. Even if the book is different, even if I read a line one way and Will, you read it another way, art is meant to be subjective. We're meant to project onto art and have it create something that is maybe unique from person to person and how we experience it. So just like Life of Pi, which story do you prefer? I'm going to stick with the one that I prefer in my head. And it's fine.
And you totally should. And I'm not arguing that the way I looked at it originally was the way it should be viewed, because it's not. And I agree 100% with what you said about art being subjective. We bring our experiences to the art, and it colors us, and we color our perception of it. And that's exactly what art is. And that's what I love about movies.
And there are bad interpretations of art. Like, I don't want to say that like every interpretation is created equally. Like if, if someone could say like, actually at the end of Sixth Sense, the twist that was revealed, no, I interpreted this other way. Like, you would have to like give me like a crazy good explanation as to what it is, because sometimes a story very explicitly spells things out, and believing something otherwise is being intentionally obtuse. That's not the case with this particular scene. This scene is a nuanced conversation about multiple subjects happening at the same time between two people who have had these very different experiences. And because of that, I think it's very okay to take your own thing out of it and to put your own thing into it, whether it be one way or the other.
And we have another comment if we have time.
We do
to talk about this. We're in spoilers. The movie ends with a very long shot, close-in shot of it's Hanukkah. They're still in the house. Elio has gotten news that Oliver just spoke to Oliver after, I think, a long time not speaking. Oliver is apparently getting married, and Elio is. I think it just kind of dredges up all the feelings that he had for Oliver, even though the relationship had, the summer fling had kind of ended already. But Jackson Martin in the chat asks, can you talk about the fourth wall break in the final scene? What do you make of the final word in the film being when his mom calls him for dinner saying Elio? I think that's two different questions. The fourth wall break, I noticed, it was very brief. He did glance at the camera for like 1 second while he's sitting there. His eyes are down. He's kind of crying, having a cry for himself. But at one moment, he does look up and look into the camera. I didn't know what to think of that at the time. I'm like,
See,
that was kind of interesting.
I thought he was just watching the fire with his flock of seagulls hair. I didn't take it as him like looking directly at the audience to like break the fourth wall. I just thought it was like his eyes are downcast. He's like living in the trauma of what he's feeling. And then his mom's voice calls him back to the here and now. And that's kind of when he looks up and like gets up and you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. Jackson says, yeah, I think he does this quick glance into the camera just after she calls Elio. Just after she calls his name.
I think that so when you have a character focus, like focus on the camera as opposed to somewhere else, you're usually doing one of two different things. One of which is a fourth wall break. But there's another thing too. When you can't see what the character is focusing on, instead when they're just staring through the camera lens, it sort of gives this like 1,000-mile stare type effect to the character, where they're looking, since you can't see what they're looking at effectively nothing. They're looking past Brad, you mentioned he's looking at the fire, and he is, but he's also looking like beyond the fire. He's looking kind of into all of the experiences. And so that's the way I read that, not as much as trying to connect to the audience, but more just him living in and out of this moment, and also realizing that moment was a moment it's this weird like self-realization thing where in that moment where he's staring at the fire, I think Elio realized that this story was now 100% a part of his past and not part of his like present or his future. And there's something very bittersweet about that, knowing that, this was a thing and it was a good thing and I experienced that thing and I've changed because of that thing. But this thing will always be over here in my past, and I can only look back on that through memory. I can never experience that or touch that again. I think all of that was being portrayed by this like stare into the fire.
And I think so too. I think, and I know, some people have read the book, some people have not. Maybe, and I'm reading the book, so maybe I can report back at some point. Maybe that is more sort of like explicitly stated in the book, like what he's thinking in that moment. Like maybe it can confirm some of that. But again, that's the beautiful thing about art, is we can all read things, different ways, and maybe that enhances it for you. I don't know. I think there were some really cool artistic choices with some of the things they did in this film. And I like that everything isn't necessarily. That was, so that was something else I wanted to talk about. I don't know if you guys noticed it.
Every fucking time.
Yeah, he had a fly on him a lot. And for me, I'd have to watch it again and pay more attention.
CGI.
But it seemed like the fly was on him every time, like the trappings of his world were like pulling him like away from his thoughts of like being with Oliver, like when it was time to like shut down and go hang out with Marzia or whatever, like the fly would just show up and be on him, and he'd like try and blow the fly off, but it would land on him and then stay, and then he'd like get up and walk away. So there seems maybe some symbolism going on there. I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe there's something to it. It could also be just kind of a neat, happy accident of like shooting on location. I'm assuming it was shot in northern Italy, and just having like just some flies around set and them rolling with it instead of saying like, hey, let's get rid of that take because there was a fly. I think there's probably I would wager that there are probably a lot of scenes in movies where a bug enters the frame at an awkward time, and to sterilize the frame so that it's like whatever the director intended, they do a reshoot or they cut it out or they do let's do another take on that. And I do think that there's something very naturalistic and in the moment about letting those weird things that might happen and pop onto frame, just letting them be in the movie.
Yeah, it's odd. And was the fly in the last scene, the fireplace scene?
Yes,
it was in the last scene, and it was in the like first or second scene with Chalamet. He's like twice in the movie. I remember seeing
that scene is set in winter, and I don't know if you guys live where there's house flies, but typically you do not find house flies in winter. So either it was an accident and they actually filmed it in summertime, and the fly got on the set, or they're intentionally putting it in there as a. as something.
Yeah. So the thing is, I only ever saw the fly on Elio, but then Elio also fucks peaches, which are, full of juice. So
that's
maybe
why
the flies are attracted to him because he fucks peaches. Who knows?
Haven't we all? Haven't we all? Like,
I haven't fucked a peach.
No. What's your
I even
peel? Anything?
All of my like male friends when I was in college all tried fucking apple pies because of American Pie.
Yeah.
I resisted that urge too. So
I haven't Googled it yet, but I'm Googling it for the first time. Why are there so many flies in Call Me by Your Name? So there are articles. We're not the only ones that noticed.
Oh,
this.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answers are yet, but
Italy is nice, but it's loaded with flies. That's the
Or maybe Elio is the Lord of the Flies. He commands them all.
Oh, you know what? There's another thing that makes a lot of sense about you mentioned the fruit and like, it's because he fucked the fruit, but possibly like a kind of a more accurate kind of spin-off of that is this is a film like set in like basically an orchard.
Right.
And so it's the type of place where like you are going to have just like more flies and stuff flying around. So I think that's a big possibility too.
That's true. If we had seen flies crawling on Army Hammer and the mom and the dad and Mafalda, I'd be like, oh yeah, it's because they live on an orchard. But it seemed like they were going for a specific thing. Who knows? We're not going to solve it on this podcast.
It was actually filmed on a set to look like an orchard, and to make it more realistic, they actually hired trained flies to come in and make it look like more of an orchard, I think.
Actually, true story. They cast Andy Serkis to do motion capture for all of the flies.
Oh boy!
What can't he do?
Well, that's funny because Doug Jones was one of the apricot trees.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that he's in everything these days.
He was in the practical makeup. Andy Serkis was doing the motion capture. I'm into this fan theory.
Oh man! All right. So real quick, last thing I want to talk about. I know we're kind of at the end of the show already, but I want to expand just a little bit more. So 24-year-old Oliver. Did you guys feel like Oliver was exerting his experience, his influence in a harmful way to Elio, or did you feel like it was more of like an innocent thing? Like, what was your take?
I thought it was and the movie made it quite clear that his character approached the situation with caution and restraint. Because number one, he didn't know that this kid would be interested at all. I'm sure he didn't expect that going in. Secondly, he probably realized that the kid was young and inexperienced and fragile and questioning. And he even said it in the movie. He said he didn't want to do anything wrong. He didn't want to hurt the kid.
Right, because he was like, did I mess you up, Elio? Like, are you okay?
Yeah. And so, no, I don't think there was any of that at all. I mean, yeah. Was he hot? Was he more worldly than Elio? Yeah, but that wasn't necessarily him exerting himself, exerting his experience, to ensnare this kid in any way.
No. And don't get me wrong. Like he was more worldly and he did guide some things once they got to that particular point. So there were some power dynamics in play, but I think that those are the type of power dynamics that are always going to happen in a relationship where you have one person with like zilch experience and another person with some experience. I think the movie did its best to make sure that everything was like the ball was in Elio's court as much as what was feasible given the situation. And so, yeah, it does come down to that ultimate line that you guys had mentioned before. Like everyone's going to have their own ethical line in the sand. And I think people could make the case for a 17-year-old is never going to have enough wherewithal to exert any power in their own relationship. And so it's always going to be one-sided and lopsided. I think people could make the case for a 17-year-old is never going to have enough wherewithal to exert any power in their own relationship. And so it's always going to be one-sided and lopsided. I think people could make the case for a 17-year-old is never going to have enough wherewithal to exert any power in their own relationship. And so it's always going to be one-sided and lopsided. And I think if that's the case, that person's going to see, no matter how this film would have portrayed it, that was always going to be the outcome to begin with. So just looking at the film as it presents it, I think it does a really remarkably solid job of making sure that as often as possible, Elio is in the driver's seat.
Yeah, and one of the reasons, and something you guys both just said kind of triggered this for me, hashtag triggered, but in a good way. When I was first coming on to the gay scene, I was 19, and the very first person that I ever kissed or did anything with was a 26-year-old guy that I met who had graduated from college. He was still kind of living in the area, doing his own thing. We met through a Yahoo group of all places. But when it was clear that there was interest, we did get together, but he kind of was afraid of messing me up, I think, and he let me do a lot of the driving. So it took like weeks and weeks of getting together and hanging out for anything to really happen. And I think it was kind of the same fear that Armie Hammer's Oliver had with Elio in a way. And so maybe that's part of why this movie really resonated with me too, Jim, compared to you. I know our experiences have kind of differed. I saw so much of myself in Elio and his experience. And I think that could maybe be a big part of it. And so I think for me, that's what sets this apart. Like when I see people like Steve in Sacramento, who I love dearly. Steve is amazing, but he is one of the folks who's like, I'm not sure about this whole age thing. I don't know that I'm going to see this movie. I kind of had some similar concerns going in, but I mean, this movie completely like handles it so well, I think.
And Jackson in the chat says along this question of who kind of was driving the interactions, he said that initially Oliver did, make that move with the touch on the shoulder, but after that, he was actually kind of avoiding the situation, really, just giving the kid space. And it was actually Elio who was kind of arranging things to spend time with Oliver and kind of pushing the relationship. Like you said, Will, I think the movie gave more agency in the relationship to Elio. And I don't know how it plays in the book, babe. You're going to have to tell us how that goes. But if that's the case, or is this just the movie maybe trying to downplay any potential power dynamics there that people could find icky?
Yeah. Well, I know we're at the end, and I'm usually the one to be like, no, we're done. But one more thing, Will, you mentioned the soundtrack and the
time
earlier. I'm the executive producer. I'll make the call I want. No, I'm just kidding. We're a committee show. Love My Way. It's by the Psychedelic Furs. Can never listen to that song the same way again. In fact, like I said this on Facebook today, I want to like drunkenly dance to that song at like 3:00 in the morning at some bear dance or something. We're headed down to Beef Dip in Puerto Vallarta next week, Jim. So maybe we'll get that opportunity. Maybe we can ask a DJ who's not super full of himself and takes requests to play that song. We'll have to see. Will, were there any other standout songs from the soundtrack for you?
Oh, absolutely. The two biggies, and I forget the name of one of them, unfortunately, but the two biggies for me were the two Sufjan Stevens songs. I love Sufjan Stevens. I think he is one of the best kind of artists, period, making music these days. And the fact that he created two original pieces for this film, and both of them were remarkable, is so solid. But especially Mystery of Love, like that song is, I listen to it in the shower, I listen to it while driving. It's Visions of Gideon. Jackson Martin said it here in chat. Those two songs are just so resonant, and again, they were written for the movie. So when you look up the lyrics on them, there are a lot of references to like, art and history and antiquities built into the lyrics, and it just helps transport you into this world these characters inhabit. So yeah, those were the standouts for me.
I was just goofing around, Will, and putting up a GIF of Army Hammer's little '80s, new wave dance there, and I was thinking after the movie, I'm like, that scene is so amazing. It kind of brings me back to Ex Machina and the dance scene in Ex Machina. Like I'm like of all the modern day great impromptu dance scenes. Those two stand out as kind of being.
I actually thought when we heard it a second time, when they were in Rome or wherever it was that they were on their like final days together, where they like come up upon the car and they have the song playing and people are dancing. I thought they were going to get bashed by those people. I thought that like Italian Dougie dude was going to like pull out a gun and shoot them or something. So I was so glad that they could like gay dance to it and everything was okay.
There was tension in that scene. I'm not sure if it was intentional or not, because I don't know that that the tense that tense of a tone in this movie was a great fit, but because that's not really what the movie was about. But I definitely got tense during that scene. Like, oh my God, what are these guys going to stumble onto in that scene?
Yeah. Well, guys, it is that time. I feel like we could talk about Call Me by Your Name for another hour and still have things to talk about, but it is that time. So we're gonna transition to some quick plugs as we look to wrap up for this week. For me this week, I want to plug a movie. It's still kind of in limited release. It may not necessarily be in your area. Hopefully, it'll get a wider release at some point. But this is a film that we saw at Fantastic Fest this year. Mary and the Witch's Flower has had its limited release. So if it is playing in your area and you love like Japanese animated films, sort of Studio Ghibli-esque, because it's an offshoot, it is not Studio Ghibli, but it is a phenomenal film. You can hear more of our review if you go back and listen to our Fantastic Fest episodes, but definitely a really great film. Go and check it out if it's playing in your area. Jim, I know you mentioned you don't really have a plug this week. That's okay. You can plug me later. But Will, what do you have this week?
I'm going to bring things down a little bit with a little bit more of a depressing thing, but so good. On Netflix, there's a documentary. It's one of the ones that I think is still on the short list for Best Documentary of the Year at the Oscars. We don't know what the final list is going to be, but it's called Last Men in Aleppo. It's a documentary about the White Helmets, who are a group of people in Syria who they wear these white helmets, and their job is whenever a bombing happens, they're the ones that respond, pulling children out of wreckage and like just trying to save lives. And this documentary is so interesting because there's no like talking head aspect to it. It's really just the camera plopped into the stories of like these three members of the White Helmets, and there's so much tension because you almost feel like in every scene like oh my gosh, something like a bomb could go off, and because that's the life that these people are living. But there's also something interesting about watching a film about like something horrendous that's happening. I think we tend to think about like massacres and bombings and what have you, and we think about them in terms of total destruction from an aftermath perspective. But this is something that's been going on for like 5+ years at this point. These people are living this every single day, and there's something that's so sobering about just knowing that this is the way these people like live, and this is like and these are the experiences and these are the challenges that they experience. It's a wonderful documentary. The three subjects that they choose are characters in and of themselves, like people you root for, people with very distinct personality traits that come to light whenever they're on screen. It's Last Men in Aleppo. It's on Netflix. You can watch it right now if you so choose, and it's sobering, but it's really good.
Yeah, it sounds very similar to the short that was out a couple years ago, Will, that won the Oscar, called The White Helmets.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, very good. Well, that pretty much wraps us up for this week. I want to say a big thank you to everyone that was hanging out with us in the live chat tonight. Bobby Miller and Jackson Martin and Kalohe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Ragnar, and I just spit all over the screen. Benji Boys, Steve Sosa, everybody who was with us. It was great having you guys in the chat. We couldn't keep up with everything. Sometimes that text flies at a mile a minute. But you guys really bring a lot to the conversation as well. Sometimes you give us some really interesting questions and things to kind of work and talk around. So we appreciate you doing that. But hey, if you're listening via digital tape delay on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our website, it's not too late for you to be part of the conversation too. Just find us on Facebook. Look for Movie Bears Podcast. There's a post for the episode every week, and we have discussions going on there all the time. So don't be afraid to hop in. Let us know what you thought. And if you want to keep the discussion going, you can always get a hold of us when we're not podcasting. Jim, where can people find you online if they want to keep talking movies?
I'm on Twitter at JJP Out West. That's all one word. And you can find me also on Facebook, Jim Puliafco.
All right. Excellent. Will, how about you?
Yes. Check me out on Twitter at Whatever Cove. Check me out on Facebook. I'm William Lindis. Just make sure it's the one with the beard, please. Look for me on Letterboxd. Just search for William Lindis. That's where I post reviews and diary entries for every movie I've seen. And you can also look for me in the casino of the Cosmopolitan for the next 2 days. So see me at the penny slots.
Find him at the penny slots.
There you go. And you can find me on Twitter at iBradPro, or on Facebook, look for Brad Harris. I am the Brad Harris who has a bunch of mutual bear, chub, and chaser friends in common with you, not the gun-toting nut from Mississippi or wherever that guy's from. I'm the one that does not have a Confederate flag behind him, so that should make it easy for you to tell. And of course, you guys can always get a hold of us on Twitter. Make sure to follow at MB Podcast. That is the main account for the show. Jim tends to run that account for us. Some really cool stuff we tend to put out on our Twitter, as well as updates for the show and episodes, stuff you don't want to miss out on. So last thing, make sure to subscribe on YouTube. We had several folks subscribe in the last week, including Jim, who somehow never subscribed to his own show. I don't know how that works, babe.
I don't either. I'm still learning. But
there are some instances of bonus content that only come out through YouTube. They do not come out on iTunes and Stitcher. So you may be missing some of that stuff. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube, make sure you do. I'm done talking, guys. We'll see y'all next time. Later.
Later.
Later.